Okay, let's talk week 7. Headlines. Sunday Night Football. Philadelphia takes care of Miami 31-17. Philly is the 1 seed today in the NFC. And off the loss to the Jets, where, a lot of times in the moment, you're like, man, what's going on? What's happening? And then you look at the box score and you're like, oh, well, they were -4 in turnovers. You're going to lose that football game. The fact it was even close is a credit to Philadelphia. So they lose to the Jets. They come out strong against Miami. And there's a couple things from this game. I'll get to the win stuff, but there was very clearly a moment where Hurts was hurt. He scrambles out to the left side to get the first down, but you could see he pulled up. And then when he got to the sideline, it took him a bit to kind of gather himself again. And then after that, he immediately hit somebody for a touchdown. And it was like, yeah, but something's wrong. Something's wrong. So I don't think you saw the designed runs. The tush push. I do like the brotherly shove better. Those are not exactly like hurdling over people, right? So, and then after the fact, I guess he was seen in a knee brace, and you could tell there was a report at halftime too that he was the last one to come out of the locker room. So at least something to monitor there, despite the great win. Another issue with Philly coming into this, on top of some of the Hurts turnover stuff that we've been talking about, is their red zone touchdown percentage. Last year, they were scoring touchdowns on 68% of their red zone possessions. That was third best in the NFL. Coming into last night, they were 42% conversion rate, 42% touchdown rate, which was 27th. After last night's, they're up to 50%, which moves them up in the rankings, but certainly a little bit different. But the point that I've made about Philadelphia and the beauty of watching them all season long is that they're multiple. When I say multiple, we use that word a lot of different ways, but can you win games in multiple variations of what you can do? And last night they did it defensively against a Miami offense that was number 1 coming in. We all know what the Dolphins have been capable of. There's a lot of excuses. They're valid for Miami. They're down both corners. Waddle leaves the game, then did come back. Isaiah Wynn, Pats fans used to this one, left the game. There were injuries everywhere, and there was a lack of penalties called that were brutal, or the ones that were called were brutal, and the ones that they've missed. The roughing the passer was terrible. The missing the face mask on a pass interference on a huge, huge play was terrible. And Mike McDaniel did tweet out afterwards, like he just let people know how he felt. Which I imagine the locker room loves, but it ignores what is going to become the storyline of Miami. Fair or not, between this game and then the Buffalo game, when you get smashed like this, now it's going to be like, wait, are you awesome against the bad teams? And then when the big teams are physical, teams that can play you a certain way defensively, Chris Long, shout out, Green Light Podcast, he pointed out that Tua against pressure, I think, was the 27th rated QB in the league. And that's a combined 42 points to Buffalo and Philadelphia. So I think it's fair. I imagine only Dolphins fans would think it was unfair, but it's a real observation. Now, look, you're at Buffalo, Sunday night in Philly. Those aren't exactly easy games to win. But when you are so dynamic offensively against everybody else you've played, and other teams look helpless against your motion, against your speed, and all of these different things that you have going on. And granted, Achane isn't playing right now, but Moster's been terrific as well. It's a real observation. Now, if you push it forward, and by the way, Nick Sirianni said after the game, he's like, we wanted to make them one-dimensional. That dimension he wanted to make them was a passing team. This is a team that was held to 12 carries for 45 yards rushing, and it wasn't really a score thing because it was still fairly close when you look at the score and how it played out. So like certain times you look and be like, oh, well, they abandoned the run because they were down. Well, that wasn't really the case. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it against this Philly front, and when Tua got moved off of his spot, it clearly was an issue. So if you look at the entire game and the scoring part of it, I mean, there's a pretty fair argument to be made that Miami had one good drive the entire night. They had the pick six, they had the fumble, which led to a field goal, and then they had the one touchdown drive. And there's your scoring. And that's not what you'd expect. But for Miami, they're 5-2. They've got New England. Then they've got Kansas City, which is an early one. They've got the bye. They're going to be favored in, I'd say, 7 of their next 8 games. They finish at home against Dallas, at Baltimore, who looks terrific, who we'll get to, and then at home against the Bills, and 4 of their last 5 are at home. So they're likely still going to have a really good record. But the NFL public is going to want some kind of statement win against the big boys. They're going to want your offense to resemble anything close to what we've seen for much of the season against everybody else. And I think that's totally fair because that's what we're doing. All we're doing is changing. It's not moving the goalposts on teams. We're changing the standard of how we want to see you based on the way we're talking about you. And I don't know if last night's a reset, a wake-up call. All I know is it was real, and it was a pretty significant win for Philadelphia. And both the Chiefs and Eagles sit at 6-1, the only 6-1 teams in the NFL, both one seeds in their conferences. The best win is Baltimore. If I'm going to use the Philly thing for the open, but Baltimore's win might be even more impressive than what Philadelphia did last night. 38-6 against the Lions. It was 28-0 Baltimore before Detroit even had its first down. And that's the number 3 offense in the league coming in. The Lions also had the best rushing D in the NFL, allowing only 65 yards per game. The Ravens went for 146. Lamar had a perfect passer rating. It was his best game of the season. There was a rush by Aiden Hutchinson where you think, okay, he's got him because Aiden's been really good this year, and Lamar even got away from that. And they didn't really need to run him that much. And even Dan Campbell said after the fact, we wanted to make them one-dimensional, which meant Lamar passing. And he was like, that didn't work. To his credit, gave him everything. Baltimore's 5th now in the NFL on third down conversions. So, I know there's also a counter to this too, which feels a little college football-y when you look at Detroit and say, okay, you know what though, you guys, and anybody that had Detroit number 1 in the power rankings, I felt that was a little bit of, I don't know if it's just the recency bias of it all, or I would argue maybe just trying to do something a little bit different than everybody else. If you look at the schedule, okay, fine. And as I've mentioned, as we all remember, week 1 against Kansas City, it's a really nice win for them, but we know no Kelsey or Jones. They lose to Seattle. They beat Atlanta, Green Bay, the Panthers, and Bucks. Not exactly a murderer's row, but they won all those games by 15 points or an average of 15 points, right? So if we're constantly talking about how hard it is to get wins in the league and how often I make a joke of like the team that had a losing record coming into the next year being like, we had 8 games where we lost by 1 score. And you're like, dude, that's the entire league. Okay. That's why these spreads are rarely over 7 points because that's just how these games play out all the time. So if we take those into account, you can play the Detroit strength of schedule thing and it's accurate, but they were beating those teams pretty well. And the Ravens absolutely put it on them. So I don't think I think the number 1 power ranking stuff for Detroit was a little ridiculous, but then to say, wow, they hadn't really played anybody, they exposed themselves as absolute frauds. Now, Baltimore worked them. This thing was over quick. Detroit even down 28-0 went for it on 4th down in midfield just to try to see if they had any chance of getting into it. Worst loss, Buffalo at New England. No, I'm going to save that one. I think it's the Raiders, 30-12 at Chicago. Tyson Bagent, a.k.a. 8 Mile. Did you see him after the game in the locker room? Full sleeve, but also full chest billboard. I guess his dad is a 28-time arm wrestling world champion. I don't know. Did he start arm wrestling when he was 8? But I'm not quite sure how. Maybe it's like Olympic golds. Anyway, still impressive. The last start for Bagent was against Colorado School of Mines in the playoffs, and he puts up 30 on the Raiders. The Raiders' offense is now 30th in the NFL. Points per game, 16. New England's 31st. The Giants are 32nd. Hoyer, who I didn't realize this, he now has 13 straight losses as a starter. It's the second longest streak of the last 10 years. Deshaun Kaiser has the record for at least the most recent time at 15 straight losses. So the Raiders' offense continues. They've only got 1 game where they're over 20 points that's also against New England. But this is not what you'd expect. And then apparently Schefter had the report they're not going to trade Devontae Adams. They tried to get him the ball a lot early there, and they did. But, sometimes it's like, all right, let's make sure we feed our guy. And you're like, are you feeding him with the design of trying to establish something offensively, or are you feeding him with the design of just keeping this dude who's one of the best players in the league happy? So Garoppolo's still TBD on the return, but this is not what Raiders fans expected when they went all in on Josh McDaniels. Numbers you should know. Is offense down? Yes, it is. Mike Sando, one of our favorites, scheduled to come on soon. Total number of touchdowns, offensive touchdowns in 2020, 589 through this point of the NFL season. This season, 454. So a significant drop. The average score of points per game is still close, but there is a decline in offense. I love this next gen stat because whenever I'm watching on Sundays and I'm looking at different guys, because every stat, like if you want to go through all of the quarterback stats, you can find a stat for somebody that makes it feel like, hey, now I kind of like this guy. Or if there's somebody you don't like who's pretty good, you'll find stats be like, actually, dude, this is what this guy does. However, this one I find always interesting. It's the aggressive throw percentage, and it's an aggressiveness number that Next Gen uses. Here's the definition in the glossary. Aggressiveness tracks the amount of passing attempts a quarterback makes that are into tight coverage, where there's a defender within 1 yard or less of a receiver at the time of completion or incompletion. So let's look at the top 3 guys in aggressiveness as far as the quarterback position is concerned. They are Jordan Love, number 1 in the NFL, Kenny Pickett, and Zach Wilson. Josh Dobbs is 4th. So it's kind of funny that the best guys for me are usually the guys that are like willing to raise their level of risk. But I think that is to counter what the stat is telling us. It's something different because we're talking about 3 quarterbacks at the top. Like Jordan Love throws a pretty ball. I'm starting to think he just throws a pretty ball, but still feels early. Kenny Pickett's really nice win for them against the Rams. And having Pickens is just his break glass in case of emergency receiver has been terrific. And then there's Zach Wilson, who we've already covered probably too much. Deshaun's 5th on this list. Before he had the concussion, but then cleared concussion protocol. So I don't think he actually had the concussion. We know the shoulder's an issue too. But he was terrible in the beginning of that game against the Colts, which took on its own story. But what this number tells you, at least so far for this season, is that my feeling on the aggressiveness thing is based on game situation, where some of these quarterbacks that are certainly not the standard of the position are incredibly aggressive, maybe for no reason whatsoever. Awards. I was going to do this last week, and then I kind of waited. It was the Sergio Dip Award for worst first impression. The first possession of Bajan's career was a fumble touchdown, but I was like, nah, you know what? We'll hold off on that. Instead, we're going to give out this award, the Dead Cat Bounce Award to the New England Patriots. Is it dead? Did it move? No, I think it just bounced. New England has the second toughest schedule so far. And depending on which strength of schedule stuff you want to look at, New England was projected to have the toughest. So far, again, different projections will have different things, but I feel pretty good saying it's been the second toughest. They beat Buffalo, and they do it in a way that I didn't even think was possible to come back. Because as I was watching it, I'm like, all right, Buffalo's going to get two more possessions here. I think it was like the 7-minute mark. Like, will Josh Allen find a way? And he does. They go up, and then it's Mac Jones time. And I always feel like watching a full Mac Jones game, it's a bit like USC's defense, where you'll see SC get penetration, get a stop, maybe tackle somebody from behind the line of scrimmage, maybe 2 good defensive plays, and then it's like, oh, wait, they're going to tackle that guy on 3rd and 4 for a loss or at the line of scrimmage. Be like, nope, he gets 6 yards, conversion, move the stick, start all over again. It's just not consistent enough, at least SC's defense. And with Mac, even the game-winning touchdown, he had missed the throw before. There was a 3rd and 11 where he felt pressure that wasn't there and missed. But what he did on that drive, hitting the deep shot to the right side, I mean, the guy did something I didn't think he could do. Then it turns into a little bit of what does it mean? Well, Buffalo, oddly enough, is 4-3. And if you look at the playoff standings today, they're the 7th seed in the AFC, which, whatever, it's all too early for this stuff. It's Belichick's 300th win. Brady Bill legacy update, 49 more wins than Brady. But, okay, that's pretty much. If I were on in Boston, I would start today going, cool, they won a division game. Division games can be weird sometimes. Let's see if something happens here. Let's see what happens if the schedule starts to lighten up a little bit. And if they can put anything together that resembles a competitive football team. But I'm not there yet, despite that win against Buffalo. I'm just not going to be there. And maybe I should have saved the Dead Cat Bounce Award for next week if they get smoked at Miami.